Footfall by Niven and Pournell uses all the tropes of the alien invasion genre, but with a few tweaks to keep it interesting. The invaders come not only with weapons and a will to conquer, but a deeply ingrained set of cultural assumptions. They are more advanced technologically, though not by that wide a margin, but socially they are remarkably stable. Too much so for the task they've taken on. They're trapped by the limits of their own assumptions, and it costs them the war. What began as a conquest of Earth ends as a technology transfer to humanity. So a mile-long object has been spotted approaching Earth from the direction of Saturn. It's decelerating, clearly under power, and presumably occupied. The US and USSR mobilize, in part because they each expect the other to mobilize and don't want to be caught off guard if the enemy decides to seize the opportunity, because it was the Cold War and we were paranoid like that. Not entirely without cause. The object has been hanging out at Saturn for years, doing a little observation and prep before rolling up to the prime real estate. A delegation led by Senator Wes Dawson goes up to the Soviet Cosmograd space station to greet them in a spirit of friendship, and they blow the place up. A brief exchange of missiles follows, leaving the US and Soviet Union with most of their offensive capability depleted and launch sites destroyed. I just skipped about a third of the book. It's a slow build laying the groundwork for the characters, and there are a lot of characters to keep track of. There's a multi-page glossary at the beginning to help you keep them all straight. I'm just going to stick to the core of it and not get into the affairs, relations, and acquaintances. We've got space elephants and an Orion battleship to talk about here. So the core of it is that Senator Dawson and some of the Soviet crew, along with a few people scooped up from Kansas, are captives on the mothership, the message bearer they call it. Meanwhile, the president and his command staff hole up in Cheyenne Mountain. There's also an advisory group made up of science fiction authors there, people who've spent a lot of time thinking about alien cultures and technology, headed by a Robert Anson. Footfall is full of little nods like that. Out in the world about to get wrecked is Roger Brooks, a troublesome and kind of douchey reporter. John Fox, an environmental activist, but the kind that actually knows his stuff, not some clown standing in the road or vandalizing paintings. And Harry Reddington, a sort of shiftless biker with a history of being a mooch. At this point, humanity is on the back foot. The invaders control the high ground. They intercept anything shot up at them and take out the launch site and aircraft that sent it for good measure with high-powered lasers. And they can land ground forces with near impunity. Those weren't parachutes. Delta wings, Harry Red murmured. Hang gliders. The shapes hanging under the delta wings were not human. Melissa peered through the binoculars. Elephants, she said. Baby elephants. Jerry grabbed the glasses. Then she began to laugh. She handed the glasses to Harry. He said, "That funny, eh?" and looked. Baby elephants with two trunks drifting out of the sky beneath paper airplanes. Harry chortled. They were wearing tall, conspicuous elevator shoes. He laughed outright. Rifles with bayonets were slung over their backs. Harry stopped laughing. But that is not the Footfall. It works on multiple levels. See, they're essentially herd animals. It's reflected in their entire social structure and cultural perception. And part of that comes into hierarchies and dominance displays. The alpha male of their ancestors has become the formal title of herdmaster, and the herd falls in line. If there's a dispute, it's between factions, and such disputes are settled by the leader of one faction surrendering to the other, accepting subordinate status and absorption into the herd. This is symbolized by a ritualized surrender. The vanquished rolls onto his back, and the victor firmly places his foot on the chest of the now subordinate. This is binding in a way that we can't fully relate to. To surrender and then resume fighting later is unthinkable to them. The herd is the basic unit. A lone individual just goes insane from lack of interaction. Like goats or bison, you can't have just one. This does not serve them well fighting humans. First, no one knows any of this at the start. They just see space elephants and orbital strikes. The two sides follow different sets of rules. If the beast was so fragile, why did it continue to fight? Chinthipik-Mang remembered its ribcage sagging under his foot. It thrashed and clawed and finally stopped moving. It didn't know how to surrender. They didn't know how to surrender. Bad. And once people figure out that the snouts, you didn't think they'd be on Earth for more than a couple hours without getting their own slur. figure out that the snouts will let them go if they lay on the ground and get a symbolic foot tap, they just come back and fight again tomorrow. Which leads these pachyderms to start wiping out entire towns for breaking the surrender, an utterly abhorrent act to them. They start to wonder if our entire species is just a bunch of insane rogues. But they have a split of their own, between the crew that went into hibernation for some of the long journey and those that were born on the ship. They're still one herd, one fifth, to use their term, but there's a clear fracture point. The shipborn think the whole conquest of Earth thing is kind of dumb. They'd much rather mine the solar system and build space habitats. That's the kind of world they know. Their mating seasons are also out of sync. They're almost two herds, two distinct social identities, forced into one by circumstances. Which raises one of the big issues with the Generation Starship concept, either a mission killer or a built-in bonus depending on how it's approached. There's going to be a cultural shift on a multi-generational project of that sort. Those born on the ship will have a very different worldview from the planet dwellers that planned the mission. By the time the ship reaches its destination, the population may well find the idea of abandoning their space habitat for the fickle and unfamiliar environment of a planetary surface, with all the variable weather and other dangers that come with it, to be a bit daft. However, every culture has its contrarians and adventurers. Some of them will want to carry out the mission, not out of obligation to do what they were sent for, but rather to test themselves against the new environment and get away from all those squares and their rules on the Ark. It might be a good idea to plan for that, to assume that the Ark is going to end up being the first of a series of space habitats orbiting the new star, and the planetary settlement will be full of the adventurous and irascible ones. Instead of one, it's a mission to establish two distinct colonies, one on the planet and one living in artificial habitats. If one fails completely, it's still not a total loss, and both have a release valve for those that want a different sort of life. But the snouts didn't plan it that way. Sleepers are in charge, the mission was to settle the Earth, and the show must go on. Enter the Foot. They hauled a big asteroid from Saturn's rings, one with a lot of ice. They like a wetter climate. They don't like angry gun monkeys running around. Dropping a huge icy rock from orbit goes a long way toward fixing both issues. It hits the Indian Ocean and the subcontinent gets mostly wiped out in a mega tsunami. It rains all over the world for weeks. And they set up a colony in South Africa, because Africa just can't get a break with the colonialism. It's looking grim for humanity, but we're clever, sneaky little gun monkeys. We can't stop them from bombarding us with asteroids until we can take control of space again, and we'll never get space away from them while they have that mothership, Curtis continued. Perfect naval doctrine, Admiral Carroll said. But a navy needs ships, Dr. Curtis. Orion, Curtis said. Old Bang Bang. But how do you build an atomic death ship without the space elephants dropping rocks on you? Well, first you dispense with all the red tape that usually comes with government projects. No conferences and change approval meetings, we just do it. And you take advantage of the enemy's blind spots. Senator Dawson, still captive aboard their mothership, is persuaded to broadcast a plea for surrender that he uses to pass on something he hopes the United States will be able to use. They have a symbol, a representation of one of the snouts on his back in the surrender position that denotes a non-combatant site. Display it and they won't attack that place. Using the harmless symbol for military equipment or installations will result in bombardment of all the places so marked. The ship is being built in a huge warehouse on the coast. It has the "Don't Bomb Me" sign on the roof, and of course it's wrapped in an onion of cover stories about what's going on there, from a big greenhouse to a POW camp for snouts. It also happens that the facility is not too far from a property owned by a group of survivalists calling themselves the Enclave.
Once this facility is operational, the masses will flock to the Enclave for fresh water, protection, and a plan for the future.
Nah, they're just reasonably affluent middle-class families all paying into a sort of apocalypse hedge timeshare ranch with a big house, some bomb shelters, stored food and water, guns and ammo, all the amenities to wait out hard times. Brooks, the reporter, and Fox, the environmentalist, end up there after some harrowing adventures and have one of my favorite character moments in the book. But not just yet. Through all this, the snouts are learning. They discover that while groups of humans don't reliably stop fighting after the foot on chest ritual, they are much more likely to honor a conditional surrender, or as they understand it, a negotiated loss of status. And they have some success with this new policy. Meanwhile, the Orion, or Michael after the Archangel, is nearing completion. But if the snouts get wind of it, it's all over. Of course, Roger Brooks, the reporter, senses that the cover stories are bullshit and hatches a plan to get the scoop. He cons Harry Red, who has spent most of the book driving across the country on a favor to Senator Dawson and has been issued a ration card for gasoline as a result, semi-official business and all, into giving him a ride into the closed-off town. Long story short, Roger ditches Harry and gets out of the security zone with the big story. Harry has welding skills and good mechanical aptitude, so he ends up working on the construction project and goes up with them as part of the repair crew. Good arc, one of my favorite characters in this one. But it's the reporter that holds the world in his hands here. He has this internal dialogue going on. Damn, it's a big story. The biggest. Too big? Like finding out about the atom bomb before they dropped it on Japan. Can't print it, can't let the snouts find out, but people have to know there's hope, so man doesn't give up, think there's no chance. They have to know there is a chance. He just has to tell somebody. He goes to John Fox, partly because he thinks he's trustworthy, but also because the launch will detonate hundreds of nukes, and that's a lot of environmental damage. And Fox will be appalled, maybe even appalled enough to talk him into reporting the story, sort of giving him permission to do what he really, really wants to do. He doesn't take into account that a few nukes over the coast don't count for much compared to the environmental damage of orbital bombardment with the intention of altering the Earth's climate. Also, just because he's a big greenie doesn't mean he hates humanity. I know you, Fox said. You want that Pulitzer Prize. You'd publish. You'd tell the aliens yourself if that was the only way to get it out. They were bending over, Fox's weight pushing him down, face down into water. Roger got his hands on a cool, hard surface and pushed up. The porcelain rim of a toilet. He was drowning in a toilet, and he couldn't get his face high enough, and the strength was leaking out of him while the urge to breathe grew to agony. I hadn't decided. They launch Michael, one of the best kludged spacecraft in all of sci-fi. You've got the main ship, of course, equipped with missiles and gamma-ray lasers powered by atomic bombs and battleship cannons bolted onto it. It carries smaller craft, too. There are gunships made from battleship guns with a drive system bolted on, and they turn the space shuttles into attack craft as well. No word on whether they had door gunners. The battle is moments of terror, punctuated by hours of closing on targets, because space is huge. It's full of narrow escapes and acts of heroism. It also coincides with the captives on Message Bearer escaping into the ductwork and making a nuisance of themselves. The ships take some damage when one of the space shuttle gunships rams it. They have Senator Dawson on their bridge trying to get him to be the intermediary for negotiations. Meanwhile, the Russians and some of the other captives are running around the ship, sabotaging systems throughout and opening airlocks, depressurizing random sections, and basically just breaking things. For the first time, the Herdmaster realizes that they might lose. The Herdmaster wishes to offer conditional surrender. The air went out of Dawson. In full thrust, he might have collapsed. He said, "Speak more. You shall have Winterhome, Earth. We shall have the solar system." But the senator refuses to even transmit this first offer. "We give our surrender forever. You know us that well." "I have not been offered a surrender," Dawson said. "What is it you want?" But the Herdmaster knew, and he was trumpeting in agony now. "Wish you my chest under your foot? You shall not have that." And here's where the fractures in human social hierarchies really come into play. Senator Dawson transmits the new offer to the president. "We will help them build a new ram scoop for interstellar travel, after which they will leave and will know how to travel to other stars. All for the small price of calling off the attack right now and letting them go." Deep under Cheyenne Mountain, President David Coffey and his staff consider the offer. Or, put another way, a politician and a bunch of military men consider the situation. The president, the politician, makes his decision. Colonel, get me General Gillespie. Inform him that I have new orders. Then get Wes Dawson. We can end this with honor. Mr. President, please, General Toland said. Sir, the risk is just too damned high. I've heard your advice, General. I don't need it again. Colonel, if you please. Jenny reached for the keys. Her hand moved slowly, reluctantly. Visions of dolls and smashed children came unwanted, and corpses heaped high in a Topeka street, human shapes emerging as they decayed. She stood. No, sir. Colonel, I resign. Admiral Carroll. No, Mr. President. They pressed the attack. The entire herd faces extermination. After much deliberation within the herdmaster rolls onto his back and accepts a little human foot on his chest. There's several things we could take from this, depending on how we choose to read it. A vague, don't give up at the finish line, or a more politically charged take that sometimes treason is the right thing. Sometimes war is the answer. But for me, it's a story about how good leadership isn't a static concept. It's situationally dependent. Early in the book, President Coffee has this line. I don't think I have it in me to be a great president, David had told his wife the night he was elected. When Jean protested, David shook his head. But then, I don't think the country wants a great president just now. The nation's about worn out with great this and great that. I can't be a great president, so I'll just have to settle for being a damned good one. And that I can manage. And in normal times, which is to say times with minor crises, little wars, and many manageable problems, that's what we really want. But when times get rough, a damned good leader for comfortable times is the last thing we want. And it's a theme that carries through the story. The reporter, Roger Brooks, is good at his job. He roots out secrets the public should know. But the stakes are relatively low when it's just a question of outing a politician's corruption. When the survival of humanity is at stake, someone needs to shut him up. Harry Reddington is another great example. During the easy times, he's a loser. But when the stakes go up, when the difference between success and failure isn't measured in bank balances but in life or death, that's when he steps up. And at a really basic level, it's a war between two established ways of doing things and sets of cultural assumptions. But while the snouts are rigidly locked into theirs, humans toss things out when they no longer serve the needs of the day. Need an atomic space battleship in a year? No problem. We'll just toss out all the red tape, oversight, and safety margins. Elected leaders? This is wartime and the suits are too soft to make the hard calls. And the end result is the invaders become subordinate, a vassal race, and humanity gets a trove of new knowledge and technology. But there's another facet here, because the snouts are also the beneficiaries of a technology transfer. Most of their knowledge was acquired not by experimentation or building up from first principles, but by unlocking the secrets of the Thuktuns, repositories of knowledge left behind by a now extinct predecessor species on their homeworld. It was a relic of sorts, a granite block 25 or 30 feet long by the same distance wide by half that in height. Its corners and edges were unevenly rounded, as if it had weathered thousands of years of dust-laden winds. There was writing on it, in it. Wes could see overhead light glinting through the lines. Something like a thread-thin laser had written script and diagrams all the way through the block. Message Bearer's interstellar ramjet had been made from that diagram. For them, technological progress has been gamified. Solve the cube for a knowledge prize. And it reinforces their closed thinking. They don't think for themselves. Maybe they never had to. The snouts end up acting as a catalyst for human expansionism. Not only do they unite the major powers of Earth in a common cause and achieve unilateral nuclear disarmament, however temporarily, by burning up the entire stock, they also demonstrate that interstellar travel is not only possible, but that there are things worth traveling to. As a bonus, Orion has moved past the concept stage into proven hardware, showing that huge payloads can be launched into space. I wouldn't give very high odds on a snout population surviving past one generation either. They might take their surrender very seriously, but we're better at holding a grudge than holding an agreement. In short, they didn't know what they were getting into until they stuck their foot in it. The old unknown unknowns are what'll get you. Footfall also came out of the same initial concept that gave us Lucifer's hammer, which I really need to get to at some point.